Thank you very much. And thanks very much to the conference organisers for giving us the opportunity to talk today. And as the conference is all about education and engagement, then I wanted to concentrate this talk particularly on some of the type of messages that we deliver as part of our educational work. So hopefully it will be enjoyable to yourselves. Let's have a look. Jumping straight off by the looks of it. We lost the slides. Here we go. Okay, so what I'm really going to be concentrating on is the emotional, cognitive abilities of animals, and just demonstrating that animals, one, experience these emotional and cognitive abilities, but also demonstrate behaviours which we can start to look towards describing as actual morality and moral behaviours. And these are the things that I think as part of our work when we are talking to various audiences, I think we can start to bring into our messaging, as well as talking about some of the messages about animal suffering, animal welfare, but actually starting to hopefully get people to engage with animals and learn a little bit more about the individual personalities of animals and the types of experiences that they have, and hopefully then being able to relate those experiences to our own experiences. So first of all, if we think of like just the positive experiences, something that we all know about, joy and happiness in the animals that we have within our own lives, within our own communities. We see this, anybody that has dogs will see this, will take your dogs to the park and you'll see what we now know as this play bow, which is the communication between one individual dog to another to say that I want to play with you, I want to engage in a positive relationship with you. This is something that we've seen across all animals. We can see this now if we look to some of the farmed animals. We only have to watch them in the fields. We see these positive experiences that they can have. We see this here in the pigs, with the cows, with the sheep. But we're now beginning to see it also in certain animals that we traditionally may not have thought would have experienced these type of emotions. So if anybody follows some of the behavioral research being done by Lars Chitka, then we're beginning to see things like positive emotional experiences and play in animals such as bees. So in these cases, these were bumblebees which have been shown to actually voluntarily and spontaneously engage in rolling these wooden balls. And this is when bees were given the opportunity to go from A to B to a food source and didn't need to go through a certain chamber where these balls were, but would voluntarily go into there and to move these balls around. And again, this is being defined now as potentially play behavior in an invertebrate, one of the first that's been seen within insects. And of course, play, particularly social play, also has a moral element to it. And this is something which we all do. We see within our own lives, within our own children, and we see it within the animal kingdom, because for play to be something that continues, then individuals have to make a conscious decision to how they're going to go about that play. Certain individuals will have different strengths to others, and so those individuals are making this conscious decision to say, I am stronger than you, but I'm going to not use all of my strength and all of the skills that I have, because I don't want to harm you. I want to engage in this play. So that's a moral decision that is being made subconsciously by an animal to continue this activity of play. On the other end of the spectrum is the negative emotions that animals can experience. And it's something which I think we've all become familiar with now for animals like elephants, that we know experience, any elephants in particular that experience any major signs of trauma, such as wild elephants that have maybe lost family members, are then seen to it has a long-term adverse negative impact upon them because of that experience. But we need to be thinking about this across the board as well. So we see this again with some of our farmed animals, particularly animals which go through traumatic experiences. We can relate this to the dairy industry in particular, where the bonds between the mother and the infant is being broken as part of that whole management of dairy cows. And we see these behavioural signs of sadness, these behavioural signs of depression in these individuals, both within the mother but also within the infant, when that bond, which is an incredibly strong bond between the mother and the infant, is being broken. But again, turning back to the invertebrates, then we're also beginning to see these emotional signs of nervousness, which have been seen in the behavioural research surprisingly to some animals like the bees. So in these cases, the behavioural research has been shown that bees are displaying what we call a pessimistic judgment bias when they're in a situation where they receive a slight amount of stress before being presented with a novel stimulus, which they're less likely to approach a novel stimulus if they've received some amount of stress prior to that, rather than if they've received a positive reward before being presented with a novel stimulus, then they're much more optimistic. So optimistic and optimism and pessimism being seen within the invertebrate community. Here's a short video. We move on to empathy. It's something that we recognise within ourselves, and we recognise it's been widely recognised within a number of the mammals that we work with, particularly within the great apes, the elephants, within the cetacean communities. But also now we're seeing it in many other species as well. So there's been a lot of work which has been looking towards rats. Rats develop very, very close social relationships with each other, and individuals which are bonded with each other are demonstrating empathy towards each other, particularly if they're put into a situation where one of those individuals is in a stressful situation, then another individual will work incredibly hard to help out, to try to remove that individual from that stressful situation, even when there's no direct benefit for the helper individual. So again, this definition of empathy being seen in animals which traditionally we may not have thought it would exist within. But also, again, looking at the farmed animals, then empathy and emotional contagion has been demonstrated within the hens, particularly hens, the emotional reaction to seeing their chicks being put into a situation where they're feeling some amount of stress. So in this case, mother hens are being able to observe their chicks receive a puff of air, which is causing the chicks just a mild stress, and then observing the mother's reaction, and we're seeing the temperature rise in the mothers, the heart rates rising. So again, them understanding that there's a stress which is being caused to something that they're very much bonded with. And then within the fishes as well, and I'm really pleased that we're beginning now to see a lot more research, and a lot more work into fish welfare. I'm really pleased to see we've got the Fish Welfare Initiative here with us again at this conference, and I'm sure you're going to hear a lot more about the work which is being done to improve the welfare of fishes. But also, we need to look at the social lives of these animals and their ability to experience these emotional and cognitive capacities. In this case, I put the manta rays. Manta rays spend a huge amount of time on their own in the ocean, but they do come together into these large congregations. And research on these manta rays is now seeing that these are not just congregations of individuals that are all just coming together and just all sort of mixing around as a large unit. These are individuals that are coming back to a point and then associating with another individual that they've had a relationship with. So they're coming back and spending individual time with individual manta rays. And we begin to see that in some of the shark species as well, that spend time apart, long periods of time apart, and then maybe congregate at certain times of the year. And there's a lot of research now looking into fish shoal populations, and if you start to identify them by individuals, then they're not just randomly swimming around in a large shoal. They are actually associating themselves with other individuals within that shoal. So these social bonds are evident within the fish species. They also cooperate with each other. So the rabbit fish, these operate in pairs, and when one of the fish is feeding, then the other individual acts as a lookout. So this other individual is scanning the environment, allowing their social friends to feed safely, and then warning them if there's a danger. And these roles will change between the two of them so that the other one can then eat in relative safety. And we're even beginning to see altruistic behavior in some of the fishes as well. So these are the convict chitilids of Lake Tanganyika. These are demonstrating these altruistic qualities by supporting the dominant breeding pairs to help to raise the youngsters. And individuals are much more likely to provide food if they've had that shared experience for themselves when they were also young. So in addition to this, we're seeing this idea of fairness between individuals. We see this particularly within the primates, particularly within animals which are cooperating with each other to access food. So in many cases, it may take a number of individuals to access a food source, and rather than just one individual then maybe having all the access to the food and then running off and eating all the food, then often the result of that is actually sharing of the food. And behavioral experiments have shown that individuals that can't actually physically gain access to the food, even though they've been involved in helping an individual gain access to that, will then share that food. They will actually physically give food to other individuals. But again, back to the fishes. Cleaner fish operate in pairs in some cases, where they're at these cleaning stations. Fish will come along and they want all the dead skin and the parasites to be removed. And what we see within these species is that two individuals will be cleaning one individual fish. And there's always going to be a temptation for them to maybe take a bit of a bite out of the fish and get some of the fleshier skin. It's much tastier, much more nutritious for them. But if one of those individuals does that, then the larger fish is likely to swim off, which means then neither of the two individuals get the food that they want. If one of the individuals does that, the other one will reprimand the one that actually did that behavior. So it's in the best interest for them, for both of the individuals, to actually say, you know what, I'm not going to do something which is tempting to me, because it's good for me, but it's also good, it's better for the individual that I'm working alongside. If we look at things like problem solving, there's been a lot of work now done on the cognitive abilities of animals. Particularly, we know this from the work that Jane Goodall did initially with the chimpanzees. Particularly now seeing the crow species, which are finding all kinds of ways to solve problems, particularly to find food, and not just using tools, but also manufacturing of tools to be able to specific to certain situations. And we're seeing within some of the farmed animals as well that individuals within hens here can actually develop expectations, can anticipate the future, and have this ability of self-control. So behavioral experiments here where hens can learn that if they were to peck at a certain point, they would receive a food reward. But if they were to wait and carry out this self-control period and then to peck at a certain point, they would receive a larger food reward. And again, this is something that hens can learn and then carry that behavior out. So learning how to problem solve and to have a wider benefit for themselves. And now we're also, again, going back to the invertebrates, learning these fascinating problem solving as well as social learning skills in the invertebrates such as the bees. And there's a video here to demonstrate that. So these levels of cognition which are now being seen across the animal kingdom, again, something which was back in the 60s, mainly through the work of Jane Goodall, was being seen in particularly within the chimpanzee communities that she was observing in the wild, showing this level of social learning now being seen in animals such as the invertebrates, and not just social learning, but actually being able, individuals, not just learning to carry something out, but actually improving on a task as well. So another experiment which has been done with the bees is, you can see from this is a setup here where bees were trained to roll a ball from the outside into this central point where the yellow ring is, and then once they rolled the ball into that area, they'd receive a sugar reward. Now the initial bees which were trained to do this could only move the ball which was furthest away. The two other balls were stuck to the ground, they couldn't move it. Observer bees would then watch the bee which had been trained to do that behavior and then would be allowed into the arena. But in this case, all three balls were movable. And the observer bees would start off by moving the ball that they'd seen that would move, but then would gradually realize that actually there was an easier way of doing it, and they would find the ball which was closest to the center and start to move that. So it's not just social learning by one individual learning a task from another by observation, but actually then improving on that just by using their own cognitive ability. And then something which, again, starts to challenge all of us in terms of cognitive abilities, perspective taking. We know now this idea of theory of mind. This is the ability for us to know what information we have and we don't have in ourselves, and know what information another individual may have or may not have. Again, this has been demonstrated, a lot of research in the animals like the great apes, where we know that they can experience theory of mind. They've got the cognitive ability to know what other individuals do know and don't know. But we're beginning to see this now in other areas of the animal kingdom. In particular, this was research which was done quite a long time ago now, back in 2000 at Bristol University, showing that pigs are capable of assessing what another pig does and doesn't know. And in this case, individual pigs, some pigs could see where food was being provisioned within a field, and others couldn't see that. And then all the pigs were allowed to go into the field. The ones which hadn't seen the provisioning would soon realize, after a number of trials, that certain individuals went straight to the food. So they knew to follow those individuals straight to the food. What would then happen is that, in this case, the pigs which had the information were smaller pigs. than the ones that didn't, and these were much larger pigs. So when the larger pigs realized the smaller pigs knew where the food was, they would go straight there and they'd just bump them off the food so they could get the food themselves. What the experimenters didn't realize would then happen is the smaller pigs were making a conscious decision to take the larger pigs to the smaller areas of food. So then the bigger pigs would come, bump the smaller ones off from that smaller pot of food, and then they would go off and find the larger bit of food. So again, really complex behaviors which are going on in these individuals. So to finish, I've run through a few examples, but the idea of this talk really was to say that we now know that animals have these very complex emotional and cognitive capabilities, and also demonstrate moral capacities. We've known this now since the 1960s and the amazing work of Jane Goodall. We're now beginning to see it in some of the species which we just haven't given enough respect for, and I'm really pleased to say that our society is really beginning to change, and we are beginning to see animals such as the fishes being included within our circle of compassion. And thanks to the work, particularly of Lars Chitka, we're beginning to see this now in many of our invertebrate species as well, particularly within the insects. And this understanding of the rich and the diverse emotional, cognitive capacities of animals firstly has huge implications in terms of the way that we use all the animals, but also can be very much used in our campaigns and our educational work to try to get people to empathize and engage with animals as individuals in ways that we may not have traditionally used. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Dave.